you grew up in an environment where there weren't many other South Asians.
Very few. Kids would be hanging around the shops and they'd be openly racist and say things or sometimes spit at us and stuff. So it really made me become withdrawn and actually not be proud to be Indian at all. I just was like, when other children constantly tell you, you're the color of poo, you're not clean, I really started to hate my own skin, started to hate myself.
Can you recall what that first memory was where you had that realization like, oh, I have grown up in a household that has a different way of living to the people around me?
When I started primary school, it's like people asking, why does your mom wear a cloth?
Wow.
And why does your mom have a red dot on her head? And all of these type of questions. So I knew that there was a difference.
I challenge you to go into a South Asian house and go into the fridge and not find a plastic yogurt container that has something in it apart from yogurt.
It's not intentional, but
No.
we are by culture it's a sustainable culture.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But we don't call it sustainability. I applied for close to 300 roles, didn't get one response. And then my lecturer at the time looked me in my eyes and he said, why don't you try using a more English sounding name?
Wow.
Kept my initials Ketan Dattani
Okay.
and became Draper. It's difficult for a South Asian young person wanting to go into that career because there isn't enough representation. In fact, sustainability is the second least diverse sector in the UK after farming.
What do you say to someone, a kid who says that I don't know what to tell my parents, that I have an interest to actually turn this into a career?
What?
Hello everyone and welcome back to Roots2Routes and this extra special collaboration with South Asian Heritage Month. Today is an extra special guest because he is the talent acquisition specialist for the sustainability sector, the CEO of Buckingham Futures, and a very close personal friend of mine. Over the next hour, you're going to find out why it's not just great for us to be proud to be South Asian, but also why it's cool to care about nature and the climate. So, over to you, Ketan.
It's a real pleasure to be here on the Roots2Routes podcast and representing South Asian Heritage Month. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next hour.
Some people already know that we've recorded an episode before and we dived a lot into your background story, what's inspired you along this journey, and just how much you're achieving across it. We'll relive some of those things for sure. People can also check out the previous episode. But I found a quote that you said, which to me just summed up everything that you're not only doing, but everything that you stand for so well. And it's when you said that I have a desire to provide for the community that gave me my legacy. Break down what you meant by that.
Well, so growing up in the 1970s, being South Asian was a very difficult period, especially being the only Asian family on a council estate. But it was the grounding that I had within my own household and the customs and the way things were, the appreciation of nature, even though there was no nature there, it was ingrained in me in terms of all life is sacred, all life is equal, take what you must, only to sustain yourself, don't waste, don't pillage, so that was ingrained in me from a really early age before I even knew about the environment and what it meant, and I was fascinated by that.
Growing up in, like you've said, where it's ingrained in you to kind of adopt the values of South Asian culture. So I grew up in a South Asian culture. I think a lot of people listening will be able to relate to this, but I challenge you to go into a South Asian house and go into the fridge and not find a plastic yogurt container or another container that has something in it apart from yogurt. I think there was this stat I saw that 90% of Indian households have in some form recycled plastic containers. So it's something that's, it's inherited in us where we might not even realize, we might think, oh, that comes from, we just like to recycle and reuse stuff because we're poor or cheap. We don't like to buy the right utensils, Tupperware for what it's intended for. But I think there's something deeper in that, which is we're just resourceful.
Yeah, and if I've got a packed lunch, it would be packed in that. Someone's come over for dinner, would say, here, this is for the journey. Again, will be packed in reusable plastic containers.
And I think it's a lot of it is what I call like inadvertent cultural inheritance. Like
absolutely,
we didn't consciously, I guess, in a lot of cases, go out there and think, oh, it's better to reuse materials. It's kind of, well, our parents did it and their parents did it. So yeah, our grandparents would always, another classic one is, you go on the flight and they give you the forks and the plastic forks and knives. I've heard so many stories like my ba did it, my masi does it, where they'll pack it away, right? Because they're probably just going to chuck it away. So a big part of our values is not to waste, right? Even food on your plate. You can't leave food on your plate because it's waste. Do you think that's something that we, especially in the space that you're working in now, are or should be proud of? Or do you think there is this disconnect where we're almost a bit embarrassed?
I think environmental awareness is quite a recent phenomenon in the last 10 or so years. So and people, because quite often you're only looking at the food on your plate thinking, oh, that's too much, I don't want to eat it. That's that. You don't really think about the waste and the carbon effects of that, and then how it's going to be recycled. Will it be recycled? Will it go to landfill, the containers? And there's so much more to it. And I think just that awareness has made everyone more conscious of what they're eating, where it's coming from. People are reading the packages more, looking at, is it locally produced? Is it not locally produced? And obviously price is a factor, but I just think there's a lot more awareness. And even now, like when we go around to my parents' house, my parents will always insist on my children, they can take food 10 times if they want, but not fill their plate up and waste it.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. So take some, finish that, take more, take as much as you want, but don't take more and then have it sitting on your plate.
And I think that the values thing that's one of the great values of, and it's not just South Asian. There's a lot of cultures where they really respect not wasting, because it probably
but
is.
We call it anaj, right?
Yeah.
And before we eat, you pray to the food to say, look, thank you God for giving us this food.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that just we come from a history where a lot of us grew up in, or our ancestors grew up in villages where we didn't have a lot, right? So we couldn't actually afford to waste it.
No.
But that's what I mean by the inadvertent cultural inheritance, that because we're still, a lot of people are probably subconsciously practicing a lot of these things because they're just used to growing up with it. But it
could be seen as being, overtly or a bit embarrassing.
Yeah.
Right? So for people that are not used to that culture or aren't actually aware, I see what you mean. Absolutely. But it's definitely something that has been passed, even my lifetime, from my grandparents to my parents, to me, to my children. And we still, it's something I'm very conscious of.
Yeah. I find it really interesting, your kind of inspiration, like where your journey began in this space. And, definitely go into it for those who don't know. Like, you grew up in a environment where there weren't many other South Asians, right?
Very few.
And
none.
Right. And that's where, when you were first telling me that story on the first time we did an episode, that was, surprising and new for me to hear, because we come from a very similar backstory. But I grew up with a childhood where it was quite diverse, and I was with other people who had immigrant backgrounds. So I didn't face that fear of, I'm not going to get accepted, but I did grow up with like different household habits that when I first invited friends over, it did sit in my mind that, oh, what are they going to say? So for example...
But then you must have been aware that this is something, unique to the Asian culture.
Yeah.
For you to even think that.
Exactly. So like a common one is my mum, every morning, she gets up at 5 and she does her prayers, and then we offer fruit to Bhagwan, right? And it's prasad. And then she would bring that down and it would be in the kitchen. So when I would go in, there would be like a separate plate of fruit, which
is blessed.
It's blessed. And unless it's been fully offered, you can't go and have it, right? So
not.
When my friends would stay over, again, I think I was quite fortunate that I grew up in London, so it's quite diverse. But there was that was just one example of something, and I'm like, oh, how do I explain this strange tradition?
What, that you can't eat the fruit yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And like, what do you mean it's blessed? Isn't it just from a Tesco packet that you've now washed and put it in a bowl? And then I have to, when I'm young, it doesn't really make sense.
You can't articulate that.
Yeah.
To someone who's not from the culture, yeah.
This is for God first, and then by then having it afterwards, it's from a better place. So, for you, can you recall what that first memory was where you had that realization, like, oh, you know, I have grown up in a household that has a different way of living to the people around me?
That come to me quite early, actually. So if you looked at the demographics of the council estate I grew up on, it was English, probably I'd say about 60%, and Caribbean about 40%. So what immediately stood out to me when I started primary school is like people asking, why does your mom wear a cloth?
Yeah.
So the fact she was wearing a sari, you know, and then it was, yeah, why does your mom wear a cloth? When I look at the other ladies, black or white, would wear dresses and that type of thing. So that immediately made us stand out. And why does your mom have a red dot on her head and all of these type of questions? So I knew that there was a difference. Preschool, not preschool, but certainly like before primary school, nursery and stuff, I knew that I was different to the other kids, and my family was different to the other family because, as I say, nobody looked like me. There was white or black.
Yeah. You know, where does that turning point come where you actually start to see this identity as not something that you want to hide?
I tried to embrace it as much as possible. And it really, as a kid, you're just desperate to fit in, right?
Yeah.
So I tried to un-Indian myself almost, like try and say, no, I don't eat. Oh, what do you eat at home? Do you eat packy food and all that? No, we don't. We eat fish and chips, shepherd's pie, mate.
Yeah.
You know? So I'd find out I'd listen to what they say and I'd try and mimic my house, because I didn't want people to come to my house and see all different grains and herbs and spices. And because you go to the house, I mean, I wasn't really invited to other people's houses. There wasn't that interaction, you know, because it was that almost not knowing and the general. So from a young age, kids were influenced by their parents, and their parents would say, like, these people are coming to take your jobs. They're like, almost like the enemy.
Yeah.
So there was almost an instant distrust. But I tried to sort of mimic from hearing other kids, just try and emulate that life to say, look, I'm one of you guys. You know, I want to be friends with you. I want to kick a ball out with you. I want to hang out with you. Failed miserably. So I was, you know, trying to be more sort of accepted and liked, because my culture made me, I was highly embarrassed because of even just going to the shops. You know, people would openly be racist to especially when I was with my mom, because she was wearing a sari, has a chandler on, and kids would be hanging around the shops and they'd be openly racist and say things or sometimes spit at us and stuff. So it really made me become withdrawn and actually not be proud to be Indian at all. I just was like, and as a young kid, when other children constantly tell you, you're the color of poo, you're not clean, I really started to hate my own skin, started to hate myself.
And that's the one thing that really serves as, it makes so much sense why you stand for what you do. And, you know, one of the things that you commonly talk about with Buckingham Futures is that you're standing in this space between serving racial inequality and climate change, which are, you know, the racial inequality side is quite clear to see why that might mean so much to you, that you don't want people now to go through what you did. But where did that climate change angle come from?
From a very, very early age. So, as I say, I grew up on a council estate. Barring rats and pigeons, there was no wildlife, if you consider that wildlife. So, but I used to spend a lot of time in the Midlands, Coventry in particular, with my grandparents. So every Easter, every 6 weeks over the summer, and most half terms I'd spend in Coventry. And what I noticed in Coventry is that just the air was different. You'd hear bird sounds that I'd never heard before. There were ponds, and I got fascinated by just the aquatic invertebrate diversity. Started getting a small net, collecting them. So really, I've discovered nature probably at the age of 4 or 5. And over a 6-week period, what I used to do, I used to collect eggs that I'd find on leaves and try and get that particular plant, keep it alive in water.
Yeah.
And actually watch the whole metamorphosis from an egg, for a caterpillar, for a pupae to a butterfly over that 6 to 8 week period. And sometimes they wouldn't pupate yet. Then I'd bring them back to Plumstead and carry on that whole thing. So I was just fascinated by nature, and I'd have a magnifying glass, just the whole a world that lives within aquatic, aquatic settings and stuff like that. Really, I was just fascinated, and I just wasn't exposed to it. So I tried to recreate in small vivariums and jars and stuff like that as a small kid, and create mini ecosystems.
And then did you just naturally then fall into this kind of field?
No. So it was a time where there was no environmental awareness.
Yeah.
And anyone I spoke to about it was like, what's that? So, there was the Chernobyl disaster at the time, there was acid rain. These were the things that I was realizing that human activities are causing through factory farming, through travel. Yeah, predominantly factory farming, actually. It was the biggest pesticide use and stuff like that. It was filtering through. And the environmental effects that were sort of passing down the ecosystem, or passing up the ecosystem. So obviously the apex predator, ultimately, birds were laying eggs with soft shells, populations were depleting. But I had no one to talk to about this.
Yeah.
I was reading up on this stuff secretly as well, because it was frowned upon if you on the council say, you read books, man, what are you on? What's wrong with you? So I used to read books secretly. I used to go to the library, and I used to go to the adult section and read anything biology, ecology related, and I was just fascinated by that stuff from, as I say, very early age. Come high school, I started to get into a little bit of trouble. I had a big period where I didn't go to school because school was a hostile environment for me. Other students were openly racist, but also teachers would victimize me openly, where they'd come right into my face, talk really slowly and stuff like that, and say, "Oh, do you understand?" And then it would get a laugh out of the whole rest of the kids. So as a young teenager, I just stopped going to school, really. But I'd still have to leave my house in the morning in my uniform, because my parents thought I was going to school. Sorry, mom and dad. So they think I was going to school, and the only place that was open at that time would be the library, and safe. So I used to I've probably been to every single library in South London,
Right.
and read about this. And about 1 o'clock, when friends of mine would wake up, I'd head back to my area, hang around, and then try and come home at a normal school expected time, and then go back out again. But I'd show my face. So it wasn't. So as I say, I fell a little bit out of the academic sphere, and then I ended up getting into a few bouts of trouble with the law, which resulted in me having to do some work under the guidance of the probation services. At one particular time, we were clearing up our area, and I discovered a colony of great crested newts, which is an endangered amphibian. Told the probation officer that this it's endangered. You can't do it. It's protected by law. His answer was like, load of shit. You'd always, what does that matter? So I actually went to Pomstead Library. Upstairs there was a museum, and I said to them that I've discovered this colony of great crested newts in this area, and we're clearing this area out. So the next day I actually went there. It was cordoned off to say that the work wasn't going on, and I had to paint a church hall. But it was really sparked my interest, because it was something I was always interested in, but I didn't know how to get into it.
Yeah.
And when I approached the careers advisor at one point to say, look, I'm interested in biodiversity, conservation, and reintroduction of species that are extinct or in the wild or at the risk of going extinct, specifically either invertebrates or large mammals. And her response to me was, well, don't your parents own a corner shop that you could work in?
No
So
way.
that completely, I just didn't know where to go with this. It was something I was passionate about. It wasn't a thing at the time in the 80s, right? And I just didn't know how to go about it.
It's fascinating because you grew up in a time where you're in a space where just even being interested in sustainability
It's laughable.
Is laughable, right? It's, what are you doing? And then on top of that, the underrepresentation that you're seeing, which I think is also something that is an issue still now. But yes, it reminds me of this study about women in science. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they purposely ran this experiment where to get into further education, I think it was some kind of master's in science, they ran two mutual, I guess they're called promotion adverts to get them into the scientific university. And in one, they showed, qualified scientists at the top of their game trying to create breakthroughs in medicine.
Which gender?
That's the thing. So in one of them, there were just males. And then in the other one, they had a fair majority of females also shown in there. Between the two, there were 3 times more applicants for the university that, for female applicants for the university that showed females in the video. And it just becomes this subconscious thing that if you have an interest in something where historically there may not have been people from your specific demographic, it doesn't just have to be gender, then if you don't see it, whether consciously or subconsciously, it's going to put you off because suddenly you don't have anyone to look up to think I can be in that position.
Absolutely. So look, this is the same thing. You can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
So as a young person, you have no one in that sector that you can aspire to be like. And my hero was, and still is, David Attenborough.
Yeah.
But there's no South Asian equivalent of David Attenborough, is there? Not even in India or Pakistan. And, well, there may be, but I've not come across it. Now I've been looking for a long time.
I've heard that it's you.
I'm not nowhere near there, but no, I idolize David Attenborough, and I always have, even when we had a black and white TV.
Yeah. Well, I think, going back to this point of what we can actually be proud of from learning from our roots, even though it might not be exactly purposefully done, right? And by that, I mean that
it's not intentional, but we are by culture it's a sustainable culture.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we don't call it sustainability.
No.
But we are, if you follow the Vedic system, just South Asian culture in general, right? It's more, obviously there are cities and stuff, but it's still very close to nature in terms of rural, and a lot of people are only one generation away from rural upbringing. So it's still very, all across South Asia, we're a lot more closer to nature, and we work in collaboration with nature, in collaboration with the seasons and stuff like that. We've lost that in the West.
So this is interesting, right? So it's, going back to another example, another classic thing with being from a South Asian background, and I'm sure that people from other backgrounds can relate to it as well. My mum used to, and still does, right? If I leave the light on for more than 6 seconds and I'm not in the room, I know I'll get shouted at to be like, why have you left the light on, right? And I get it, there's, now you hear about how can we be more sustainable and how can we stop climate change happening as quick as it could. And one of the things is turn the light off when you're not using it, turn off heating, etc. They're inadvertently doing it. But the reason my mum was doing it is more of a cost saving thing, right? Rather than consciously thinking about how it serves the environment, because at the same time, she will get in the car to go 5 minutes down the road, whereas she could just walk it.
Yeah.
So there's, I guess, the idea that you can take from what could be seen as these frugal habits, but then see that actually, like you said, it's part of our
there's
identity.
environmental benefits to it.
Exactly, yeah.
But not walking, not driving 5 minutes where you could walk it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's coming about that holistic change of there's things, and in many cases of we're fortunate to live in a space where we can pick and choose from the East and the West what is good. And we have a lot more awareness through basically the things that you're doing with Buckingham Futures to make people aware that, okay, how can I be more sustainable? That doesn't involve having to, go to Planet Organic and buy this 15-pound recyclable bag. There's the little things that we already
Everyone
do
can make small tweaks to make massive differences. Absolutely.
Yeah. And yes, I read in the India stat, and you will definitely know better than I, but I think the average Indian in their house in a year has 11 kilograms of plastic waste. When you compare that to West, in the UK, it's 109 kilograms of plastic waste.
Well, in Rwanda, it's 6 kilograms
Really?
average per annum, yeah.
There you go. The Rwandans are doing something we can learn from.
Absolutely.
But there's a really interesting quote that I found, and I just want to, I think it sums up what we're talking about really well, but I want to get your perspective on it.
Sure.
Okay, now I got to find it. Yeah, what she said was that if we look back at Roots, the mindset in some part stems from growing up in poorer circumstances or ones where we didn't have things like Tupperware or tools in abundance. So whether consciously or not, it has become part of our cultural DNA to become practitioners of sustainability. And then she goes on to self-reflect on, was it my parents' basis for being sustainable from their experiences with poverty? Sure, how could it not be? But does that make our family's values any less sustainable? I'd argue more, because it's directly and authentically from communities who would suffer from climate change and exploitation the most.
Wow.
And it's, yeah, I guess it's this idea of just because they front of mind wasn't, yeah, I'm trying to protect
the environment or preserve nature for the future generations wasn't probably the driving factor, but inadvertently they were doing so through practices.
Should we value that, identity we come from?
Absolutely. And if you actually go back, right, like with a lot of South Asian traditions, people do things because that's the way it's always been done. But initially, it started with the environment in mind, if you actually go back far enough. And then it was just been passed on from generation to generation. And people do these practices not knowing why, but really, as I say, there is that initial environmental sustainable thought process behind it, because people were living at one with nature. And that's where these practices stem from.
Well, even if you go back to, when you go to India, yes, it's changed a bit now, and there are a lot of Western practices that they're taking on board because they want to modernize. But when you go away from like the city centers where you have the malls and the supermarkets like Delhi, if you go to any of that, even just slightly outside the city center, you go to the Indian bazaars to buy your fruit and vegetables and grains, right? And that's kind of probably where this idea of how low their plastic waste is, because you'd go down the bazaar and say if you wanted rice, it would normally come in these big 1 kilogram bags that they've sewn together rather than plastic. Or if you go to get the grains or the rice, the classic, like they scoop it out and you take how much you need in the bag that you have.
Yeah.
And that's why that, you look at the West and you go to Sainsbury's and each little pack of rice is packaged in plastic.
Yeah,
right?
everything. And also, look, it's natural, straight from the farm, zero or no pesticides. You can just look at it. It's not uniform, is it? The tomatoes aren't all one shape. The fruit's not all one shape. And what I like about Indian markets, so I went once with my grandma, my bar's sister. So she went with 2 cloth bags, and the way it was set up, you'd start with the heavier items, so potatoes, and you'd buy what you want, and you end up with the softer items like tomatoes at the end. So they will be at the top of your bag. So everything's in that one cloth bag. She's travelled with it about this size, pocket square size.
Yeah.
2 of them, full of, well, I helped her carry them, but they're full by the end of it. But the way the market was set up was these are local traders, people that have actually bought stuff in from their farms, fresh produce, probably picked that day or the day before. Taste can't be beaten. It tastes just natural. And it feels natural. And the way the market was set up, it was just so that you're not damaging, like I say, you're not having individual packaging. Everything goes on top of each other. And the way you shop is that when you reach the end, you've got the softest items at the top, and you'll unpack them first as well when you go home. And they'll shop 2 to 3 times a week. This was when I was a child, right? So they didn't have fridges, so you keep it fresh. So you'll go back to the market 2 days later. That's enough for 2 to 3 days, and then you go again, and you're going to get fresh produce. And depending on the seasons, you're going to get different produce.
What is one, or you can name more than one practice like that you've got from grandparents' generation, ba or nani or something, that you now realize is a sustainable practice or something that's good for the environment that you are either practicing today or trying to teach your kids?
Well, even before this big movement about how damaging plastic is and plastic bags and stuff like that, I've always carried cloth bags. Yeah, I always have some with me in my bag or in my car, which is fully electric. And I don't purchase bags, or if anything, I will get boxes. I refuse to sort of add to plastic waste wherever I can prevent doing so.
Yeah, and so, looking at the kind of generational trend that's happening, when you look at your kids as an example, we've talked about how we probably navigated between what we found embarrassing because we were trying to fit in and not expose too much of our identity, versus just understanding what's valuable? How do you see, your kids'
Well,
generation?
my children are mixed race, so they've grown up in a different world, and I think there's a lot more equality than there was 40, 50 years ago in the UK. So the beauty of London is like your friends will be of all different ethnicities from all different parts of the world, and in fact, you kind of pick and choose best bits of people's cultures, whether it be their customs, the food, and I'd like to think, because of my children having a lot of exposure to their grandparents, i.e. my parents, a lot of the things they just they've normalized it, but it's not even embarrassing for them because everyone's more environmentally conscious now anyway. So they're probably passing some of their subconscious sustainability traits onto their peers and friends.
Yeah. And that's
without being embarrassed. They're not even aware, okay, this is an Asian thing, this is not an Asian thing. This is just a normal thing. This is what we do.
I think, one of the important things is we are probably responsible for being that driving force where there's a lot of things. I think, for people who are listening into this, it's South Asian Heritage Month. They'll be listening in because they're either curious to learn more or they're proud of where they come from. And there's so many practices that people do nowadays that actually is just part of our history and tradition. Even things like you go to Holi has become even a day festival that people go to, and you see even girls from all kinds of backgrounds wearing a bindi, and it's become a fashion statement.
Well, henna, bindis is fashionable, yeah. Absolutely.
And there is obviously the thing of, there's cultural appropriation going on, but it's still, we can be proud of the fact that our history has become a fashion statement now.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually quite cool to be Asian now. South Asian, in terms of food, the music, it's more mainstream.
Yeah.
You don't have to hide away to be. You can be proud of who you are and still, be. Yeah, it's not frowned upon at all.
Exactly.
It's not embarrassing to be proud of where your parents and grandparents and great grandparents came from.
And going on to, really what Buckingham Futures stands for, I think is a really poignant but tough issue that you're dealing with, because it's, on one side, it's, if there are people like you, and there will be people like you because you work with them, who are at an age where they're interested in sustainability, climate change, environment, is something that, yes, being in central London, I see a lot of it, but there'll be people out there who just have a fascination for nature. Then they're dealing with two things. Firstly, it's, for them personally, they might see it still as a bit like, okay, that's not as cool as liking cars or wanting to be the next travel influencer and blogger, right? It's something like, oh, I like nature, so maybe I keep it a bit on the low. Plus the cultural side of, coming from a Asian household, and it doesn't just have to be Asian, it can be any household. It's traditionally...
It's not a traditional career choice.
Right?
No.
And I get part of it, and it's been talked on a lot on this show before, but the idea of our ancestors, so our grandparents and parents, went through their own struggles, and so all they want is stability for their kids. And stability to them still means accountancy, lawyer,
or the medical professions.
Yeah.
And it's not just about stability, it's about cultural...
like prestige.
Yes.
Yeah.
My son's a doctor, or
exactly,
my daughter's a optician, or my son's an accountant. These are the sort of 3 or 4 career options that are still encouraged, even now, second, third generation in. So it's seen as a steady career, lucrative career, but it's also like something to. It's almost a talking point. They're getting brownie points. Oh, this is what my son does. What does your son do, sort of thing. And going back to the early 90s, when I first did my bachelor's degree in environmental biotechnology, if you looked at the university, the demographics were very reflective of London. But my course was not. My course, I was the sole representative. But if you looked at the uni, it was, as I say, very mixed. So it's not generally seen as a career choice for people of a minority background. And it goes back to what we discussed previously. You can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
So the young people don't have that aspiration to look at careers. Even if they have an interest, they don't really know the path to get into careers like that. They don't have role models in that area. Equally, their parents are not encouraging them to sort of pursue their passions, and then encouraging them to do dentistry or pharmacy or finance or something related to that. So it's twofold. So it's difficult for a South Asian young person wanting to go into that career, because firstly, there's not, even though people are sustainable, is the career aspect of it. There isn't enough representation. It's, in fact, sustainability is the second least diverse sector in the UK after farming.
Wow.
And certainly at decision maker level, it's changed a bit now. Similarly, when I did my master's in environmental planning and management at a different university, very mixed demographics of the university, general, if you'd walk around the campus, but it wasn't representative of my course.
You know, for people listening in, I think there'll be different ways to resonate. It doesn't just have to be sustainability. I'm sure there's so many people out there from South Asian background or anyone from minority background who have an interest in a space, don't have the representation to look up to the role models, and don't really have the family backing. So, you know, with the people that you deal with, how do you help them approach this?
So I'm very fortunate now. Now I'm in a position where I can give back, and I do open days with, collaborate with schools, colleges, because this is the age where people have, before they even make their decision in terms of what they want to do as a career. So we hold mock interviews, work experience opportunities, and I bring a panel of people with me. We have stands where they can come and speak to future employers. We bring in Chartered Institute of Environmental Health accredited university representatives. I also try and make a point of bringing a diverse panel of people with me, so that people can actually see people within the environmental sector that are diverse.
How many times do you get a kid coming to you and saying, "Oh, I see, you know, this seems really cool."
Yeah, all the time. And people, I didn't even know.
But how many times do you get a kid saying, "But I don't know how to tell my mum or dad"?
Sadly, all too often, because my dad wants me to be a doctor, but what do you want to be? You know, and look, I hate to say this, but your dad's not going to live your career. And if your passion is there, and you know what, the other thing as well, when you're young, I've done lots of jobs, from medical microbiologist to recruitment to dispensing optician. So I pivoted, and each role that I had, I enjoyed at the time. Ultimately, talent acquisition I fell into, again, because I couldn't find a role with my bachelor's and master's degree within the environmental sector. I applied for close to 300 roles throughout the UK and didn't get one response. Going back to when I was doing my master's, similarly, my thesis was on captive breeding and reintroduction of endangered mammals. And I was working on my dissertation. This was, show my age, but based on before emails and Google and stuff like that. So you had to write to people to request information. And I wrote to a lot of conservation establishments, laboratories, zoological establishments, was getting very little response, almost none. And then my lecturer at the time awkwardly said to me, "Why don't you try?" Because he called me and said, "Look, you're not doing anything, and you've got your deadline's approaching." And I said, "Look, I've written to so many people, everything you've suggested plus more, and I'm not getting a response." And he said to me, "Why don't you?" I mean, I remember this conversation like it was yesterday. He sat me down, shut the door, looked me in my eyes, and he said, "Why don't you try using a more English-sounding name?"
Wow.
So that's the day that Keith Draper was born. I kept my initials Ketan Dattani,
Okay.
and became Keith Draper. Keith Draper wrote to the same establishments. Everyone wanted to help Keith Draper. Keith Draper was getting letters. I was getting stuff from the post office saying, "We tried to deliver this and it's too big to put in your post." I was getting so much information. So then once I finished my master's, again, after 200 to 300 job applications, didn't know anything. I sent out 10 applications as Keith Draper. Keith Draper got 8 interviews.
Wow.
80% of
That is crazy.
same CV. Just changed my name.
Does that still exist today?
I mean, I still notice there's a lot of interest in the environmental sector from overseas students, but Sadly, due to work restrictions, once they've done their studies, so when I still work with closely with universities, the demographics are mixed, but generally those that are of a non-UK background, non-white UK background, tend to be overseas students rather than UK students. So they won't be practicing here. So they're not going to be representing or pursuing their careers here. They're going to be going back to Asia, Africa, and various other places. But I'd like to think, look, there certainly in London, I've seen mid-management, even senior management, people of minorities. There's far less representation outside of London. But then again, if in any field, you'd expect to be a collaboration with the sector the sector that you serve in, the local population, and the people that are advising or enforcing in that sector. There should be a similar collaboration. So if the area has 25% minorities, you expect 25% of the professionals in the environmental sector to be serving these communities. It's a massive disparity, still is. But I think there's been a lot of change. I've been doing this for 27 years, and it's been positive in the last 27 years. And people are now some heads of division and stuff, some people of minorities in quite senior positions. These are the people that I actually bring to events where we're speaking to young people, and actually can talk to firsthand about their journey and how they got to where they have.
What is the number one hurdle or challenge that you see these kids face that may come and speak to you?
Lack of awareness, firstly. Even if they have an interest, they just don't know how to go about. So it's the sector itself as well. They're not attracting new talent. They're not going out to fairs, school fairs, careers fairs. You don't see representation of people within the environmental sector speaking to young people about what careers look like there. So there's so many different angles to this because there's a shortage of professionals in the area. There's talent out there, but the talent that could be potential future environmental professionals don't know how to go about it. They don't know, there's no set career path. They don't know where to start. Their parents aren't encouraging them into environmental careers. So they're almost up against it.
And what do you, I know it's going back a bit, but what do you say to someone, a kid who says that I don't know what to tell my parents, that I have an interest to actually turn this into a career?
Well, often I've actually spoken to their parents firsthand.
Yeah.
Because some of the events we go to is parents and sixth formers. So that, I've actually spoken to their parents and spoken to about what a career in the environmental sector can lead to, how diverse it is, where it could lead you outside the UK, within the private sector, within local government, within central government. But other than me speaking to the parents, I can give them the information where the resources are online, and the type of options that what are open to them after that. Because quite often, South Asian parents are completely oblivious to. I mean, they think that there's TV programs where there's environmental professionals are dealing with filthy verminous and overcrowded premises, or dealing with pest infestations, and that's the general consensus. That this is the career that it would lead to. They don't see the other options in terms of international travel, looking at ecological, like working in rainforests. There's so many different environmental careers, right?
Yeah,
so
and the
many.
chance that you can still become a businessman in that space.
Absolutely.
It's not just you're out back picking weeds or something.
No, exactly. Yeah, or you're collecting plastics from beaches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot more beyond. I mean, I do that as well.
Yeah.
Beach cleans, but there's a lot more. There's so many corporate advantages to being environmentally aware as well. So even if they don't pursue a academic career within the environment, just having that awareness and incorporating it into their career or into their business will certainly give them that head start. And so you can still follow your passion, and there's so many different routes as well. There's short courses, there's degrees, there's conversion masters. There's so many options now.
I guess the cultural hurdle that this, not being seen as a viable career or a career that your family can be proud of, I think also plays into this idea of underrepresented voices that if you look on TikTok or social media where there's this classic image created of how it's the middle class white girl who's promoting, environmental, eco-friendly means, right? Where it's something that my dad, who loves scrolling through Facebook, right, the little reels they have, if he came across something like that, he's going to scroll straight past it, because to him it's just this middle class white girl that he can't relate to, talking about, again, like I mentioned earlier, going into Planet Organic and buying one of those like eco bottles that cost £30 and it looks really cool. So there's this issue of what's being promoted as the ways to be sustainable are not by the people that it needs to be to relate to.
No, this is it. This goes back to you can't be what you can't see, and employers and environment professionals need to be aware that the world that the young people are in is the virtual world, and they get their information from the virtual world. And I don't think the environmental sector has really caught up with that. They're still using printed magazine to promote the profession. They're not actually meeting people where the young people where the future professionals are going to hang out. They don't hang out in that world where they're reading a quarterly or periodicals and stuff like that, right? That's not where you're going to find them.
But how do we get those undervoiced voices, right? So how do we get those minority voices into the place where...
So this is, I'm trying to make sure, not only going into careers fairs, doing careers events with sixth forms, with colleges. I also do eco expos where I get young people to design environmentally friendly products, and then I'll get a panel. We'll go around, we'll judge them. We also do a Dragon's Den style event.
Like an eco-friendly Dragon's Den.
Absolutely. So then they will come and present our products, and I mean it's nominal, but we give £500 to the winning team. We work in collaboration with loads of local colleges and sixth form schools as well. Also, I've launched a podcast called The Diary of EHO, which is proven very popular. So basically get diverse voices from the environmental health backgrounds to actually talk about their careers, both within the UK, overseas, private sector, local authority, and actually give young people, because again, podcasts are popular with that demographic of age. So we can raise awareness, and meeting someone, even at a careers fair, how many people can you meet?
Yeah.
But podcasts can have a reach of thousands, millions, right? So you can actually build awareness that way. And TikTok and Instagram, and this is the world that and Snapchat, and this is the world that young people hang out in. And this is where environmental professionals need to meet them in their world to actually attract the future generation of the next generation of environmental professionals.
Yeah, just thinking of that. Have you heard of this company called Goonj? So it's by the CEO who did it in partnership with his wife, called Anshu Gupta. And what he calls it, I think it's a social enterprise that started in India. It's gone to many other places across the globe.
What do they do?
So he calls it, rather than recycling, he calls it upcycling.
Upcycling, okay.
Right? Which you're probably familiar with. But what he means by upcycling is it's an initiative where people who have excess resources of whatever it may be, they donate it to Goonj. So rather than just going straight to the end person, it goes through a process of being filtered, cleaned. If there's something that's completely torn and unusable, then it doesn't go forward. And the idea, he calls it something really interesting, which is that it's not about charity, but it's about the repurposing of materials that serve places where they need it. So it's places that have been attacked by natural disasters, where it's not just giving whatever you have spare, but it's creating something valuable
that's actually needed.
And so that's one of the best examples that I've seen of like this term social innovation, right? It's innovating in the most resource effective way, and he's obviously doing so well. So again, I think it's one of the things that he talks about is this idea of intersecting traditional knowledge and social innovation, because it's still traditional practices. Like when people donate the clothes, he's going through the process of turning those clothes into a bigger rag that can then be used to serve as maybe a blanket or something for the people who need it in like places where their home has been destroyed. What would you say are the ways that people listening in can start to, either through an example or just start to think of, let me trait this traditional knowledge. It doesn't mean that I need to go through and take my old cardigan and turn it into a blanket, like my bar once did.
Well, I mean, maybe not as traditional, but what I've ingrained in my children is try to keep it minimalistic. So if they have a toy and if they open a toy, they have to give one toy to charity.
Okay, nice.
So if it's in a box, it's fine. But as soon as it's open, then you have to. So what do you want to give away? If you want this now, so what do you want to give away? And then I'll take them to the charity shop, or because we do food distribution as well for families that are low-income families, and they can give it in person as well, which is actually amazing to see that. So similarly with clothes, if you want a new item of clothing, what do you no longer need? What are you no longer going to wear? So it's one in, one out. So I instill that on my children. Sometimes it gets a bit of mom's, but I like this.
Yeah.
Well, no, you don't, because you haven't worn it.
Yeah.
Or you don't play with that.
Yeah.
It's only because I'm saying what do you want to give away, all of a sudden you like it.
That's another thing of South Asian culture. We're very good at hoarding.
Yes.
And that's something that's taken me years. By years, I mean decades to get over. I think from having lived abroad, where every time I lived in China, then I left, and I had to strip back on things because there's only so much I can carry. I actually forcefully had to learn, what do I really not need, because I actually can't carry it. And now that's kind of carried forward, that I also go through a similar thing.
I love that analogy.
If I think, I'm going to wear it one day, then I'll already get rid of it, because that one day clearly hasn't come yet. So
exactly that.
Yeah. Ketan, thanks so much. I don't know if there's any one closing thing that you want to say that you hope either the current generation or the next generation will hear and really take on board and live by. What's that one message?
The one message is just be aware of your actions, your travel, what you eat, and just have that awareness of how this will affect the environment, because it's not just the world we live in, it's the world that our children and their children will live in. And every little bit helps.
Thank you.
Real pleasure.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to that episode of Roots to Roots. So this is the partnership with South Asian Heritage Month. There's so much more they are doing, and there's links in the description below for you to check it out. Another episode in this collaboration is going to be out next week, so make sure to click that subscribe button not to miss it. Or if you're still inspired and want to listen to another episode, you might want to check this one out.